We're now joined by a lecturer and employee relations at the University of Stellenbosch Business School, Gawie Cillie. Professor Gawie Cillie, a very good evening to you, Gawie. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I mean, you just heard what the Black Management Forum had to say about the economic structural reform that is needed in the country. We've just gone through the unemployment figures. But I just want to look at where we are now in South Africa at the moment, given the new democratic order was to ensure that we bring into the fore participation of the economy people who were previously employed, should I say, under different circumstances. How much change has occurred in the past 28 years?
Good evening to you and to your listeners or your viewers. I think great progress has been made since 1994, specifically in terms of labor legislation. We've seen a number of new pieces of legislation being implemented, a number of old laws were overhauled, and all of those really contributed to a major improvement in formalizing or improving the formalization of the employment relationship between employers and employees. So that the biggest advantage of that is that both employers and employees now, if I can use an example now, know how to play the game according to the rules. And that gives both parties, of course, specific freedoms, rights and obligations are now entrenched in different forms of legislation. For example, the Labour Relations Act that deals with the collective relationship between employers and employees, basic conditions of employment that regulates minimum standards of employment, employment equity, well-known piece of legislation, skills development, health and safety legislation. So all of those really contribute to cementing the structure of the employment relationship in South Africa, which was not the case prior to 1994.
As we go towards Workers' Day, and I want us to understand what we mean by freedom, you speak about the change in laws that exist, but we also know that the public sector enjoys some form of autonomy or application of those laws, or they manipulate it to suit whatever working environment. So how much can workers in South Africa say they're enjoying the spoils of freedom in a new democratic order? I mean, I'd like to go to the example of when you talk about employment equity, affirmative action, it's being rejected by sectors of the society who've enjoyed the privilege for so many years, saying that it's discriminatory against so many other groups. However, if you speak to the black majority in this country, a lot of them will say not much has changed, or not enough has changed.
My comment on that would be as follows. One must realize that to have legislation obviously is a major achievement. The implementation thereof is now history in most cases that I've referred to, or the examples that I referred to. The problem that we might still be facing would be, how is that executed in terms of regulation. Now, please keep in mind that all the laws that I've referred to is regulatory in nature. It tries to set certain parameters within which the parties can actually operate. Thereafter, it is really up to the parties themselves to work within those parameters. If I can use an example, your first question that you've asked me was in kind of, the freedoms and the progress that have been made since 1994, and I responded by giving you examples of formalization. That, however, is not my biggest concern currently. The biggest concern in South Africa is that although we've made major strides in terms of improving the regulation, the substance, the trust in that employment relationship is nowhere near what it should be. To give you a statistic, in the 2019 World Competitiveness Report, in which 141 countries participated, over 300 executives in South Africa was asked to rate the quality of the employment relationship or the relationship between management and employees in South Africa on a 7-point scale. South Africa came out on 3.7 on that 7-point scale and ended up in position 139. So from that particular angle, a lot of work still needs to be done to improve the trust in that relationship, which could contribute to a number of these issues that you've referred to.
Okay. Now, when you talk about the substance, a way in which to gauge that for a lot of people, and particularly in the South African context, one is opportunities, employment opportunities in areas where people would have been prevented from being employed. And I'm not talking necessarily sector specific, but I'm also talking about levels of management. But there's also the functions of earnings functions. How do they help us understand the labor dynamics in South Africa currently?
Okay, let me first reflect on opportunities. The current economic situation, which is highly depressed. You've given us the statistics here. Clearly indicates that there's a huge lack of opportunities, which is the one leg of the problem that we're facing. The other leg of the problem that we're facing is lack of skills. Unfortunately, in South Africa, although there might be opportunities, although limited, available, there's surely still a lack of skill to take up those positions. So we're actually facing a two-pronged monster here. On the one hand, limited opportunities. On the other hand, the lack of skills. And I do believe on the skill side, that is really the area where we can make some serious improvements. Do keep in mind, in a depressed job market, on a depressed economy, employers will only create new or additional jobs if the economic circumstances would facilitate those. And currently, I'm afraid that is not happening. We see it in the large number of retrenchment, the large-scale job losses that contributes to the large number of unemployed currently in South Africa.
Just on the issue of earnings functions, we come from a history where, discrimination was systemic, and I want to understand if there has been an improvement, a fundamental change in how we determine earnings functions, the value and the worth of an individual in this country beyond their skin color and gender.
In terms of the latest statistics, and I don't have them in front of me, which is made available by the Department of Employment and Labour on an annual basis, and also by the Employment Equity Commission, we've seen a dramatic improvement in compared to what has happened in the past. You must keep in mind and remember that the Employment Equity Act contains a prohibition in terms of unfair discrimination. For example, in terms of pay, equal work, equal pay for equal work. So I don't think there is a serious concern, or should be a serious concern there. I think if my memory serves me right, in terms of the figures that I've seen, there is no grey or other area that needs to be dealt with in terms of income differentials. Of course, one might still face some challenges in terms of income differentials. If you compare your senior executives to your lower level employees, that gap seems to be quite wide, wider as what you would find in some other countries outside of South Africa.
Thank you so much for speaking to us, Gawie Cillie. Much appreciated. I would have liked to have the opportunity to talk to you about the informal training policy that the city of Gauteng has just implemented, but unfortunately we don't have time for that. Lecturer of employee relations at the University of Stellenbosch Business School, Gawie Cillie.